Welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you. Thank you very much for coming today. We're going to get started in a few minutes, but I wanted to just begin by introducing global studies at Leeward Community College. For those of you who may not be familiar with our program, we offer an academic subject certificate in global studies. And this is designed to promote cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity of the world. We want our students to be engaged internationally. We want them to know about world affairs. And we want them to learn about things that are happening outside of their own island. So that's why we invite speakers every semester who will give us a more global, a more international perspective on events. There's a lot going on in the world, and we want people to be well informed about it. So the purpose of the certificate is basically to prepare students to meet the challenges, and there are many, of a global world. And to remind them that our world is interconnected and we are interdependent. And we are trying really to create globally conscious and internationally engaged citizens by our work. So if you would like to participate in the Global Studies Certificate, please see me, Professor Scotty, or Professor Khan, and we can provide you with the email addresses so that you can write to us if you have any questions about how to pursue this wonderful certificate. It's a great thing to have in your toolbox when you're interviewing for jobs. It really makes you stand out from the crowd. Okay, now I would like to introduce our lovely guest speaker. It is a wonderful pleasure and honor to have her. She has worked so hard on this program today. And her name is Sabrina Bruns, and she is an international student at the University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa. And she is originally from Vancouver, but she grew up with immigrant parents from Germany. And so she has spent lots of time in between the two places. And she now lives with us on Oahu, and she is double majoring at Manoa in environmental geography and art history. And I am very fortunate that she also happens to be my student in early Renaissance art this semester. And today she is going to talk to us about her international experience, because since she was young, she has had many opportunities to live and work and travel in other countries. And she is going to be telling us about some opportunities that you too could have if you were interested in pursuing an international career. Okay, so without further ado, welcome, Sabrina. Aloha.
Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, my name's Sabrina, and I have been going to the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa for almost 2 years now, and transferred from Vancouver, Canada originally. So essentially, as I mentioned, I'm an international student, and I have always loved traveling and experiencing different cultures and countries, and I have been lucky enough to do that throughout my life, and that's kind of what I want to speak about. So I grew up in North Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, if you're not familiar, is on the Pacific Northwest coast. It is right above Washington, and it is in a temperate rainforest environment. So fun fact there. But I grew up with immigrant parents. So my family is originally from Germany, and my older sister, as well as my older half brother, were all born in Germany. And my parents emigrated less than 1 year before I came. So I grew up in a very culturally German home, which I think impacted my desire to want to learn more about my heritage and go back as I got older, as well as just my interest in traveling in general. And some of the things that, like, for example, influenced this or made me connect more with my German heritage and inspired that is just little things like, for example, Christmas in Germany is celebrated on Christmas Eve instead of Christmas Day. And we always watched German movies and read German books as a kid. And it was just a constant integration. I spoke German at home with my family, and it made me very curious to learn more about where my parents and family came from. But I did not grow up in with a particularly financially wealthy family, and getting a family of 4 to Germany is pricey. So I didn't actually go for the first time until I was 11. So it was not a standard vacation for me. So Vancouver is a coastal city, and it is mountainous, and it kind of has a little bit of everything. And that is where I did my first 2 years of university prior to coming here as well. But one of my first international experiences that was not vacation oriented was an exchange that I did in high school when I was in grade 10. So the school I went to offered international exchanges to a variety of different schools. And I chose to go to Germany to connect more with my history and also learn how to read and write properly. So I've always been fluent vocally, but I never really had to read or write a lot in German since I went to a English speaking school. And I always knew that I might one day want to live there or even go to university there. So it was important for me to gain that ability. And so I did 6 months as a student at a high school in Germany. And while I was there, we had some time off, and I took advantage of that to go and visit family and friends and explore. So I went up to Hamburg in the north here, and Berlin, which is where my half brother lives, who is featured in the picture with the lion gate that is at the Berlin Zoo. And I also went south to visit some friends. And the area I was in is close to the Rhine River, which is a very important historical navigational river. And there's a lot of very old homes and around that area, as well as castles dotting the river. It's a beautiful area. But it was also just so different from anything I'd experienced before. And it really changed my outlook just on perspectives and how people were growing up and living. And I think that was experience that really hooked me on wanting to do things like that more and integrate myself into a society and culture that was different than what I was used to. So when I returned from my high school exchange, I had been inspired by the fashion and the aesthetics in Europe. And I know you can't tell via Zoom, but I'm very tall. I'm 5'11". And a lot of people throughout my life had always mentioned that I try modeling. And I had originally always been resistant, but around the time that I returned, I decided to give it a try. And I know this isn't a feasible work opportunity for everyone, but it is a legitimate job at the same time. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the fashion industry and modeling. So I do want to talk about my experience as it is one of the things that allowed me to travel and work internationally early on. And perhaps it is something that people thought was out of reach and might be more accessible. But either way, it just is something that is a part of my personal experiences. So I was still in high school at the time and did a lot of research on the industry. But I ended up entering in a competition for Fashion Week in China, and I was selected as one of the models to go to China. So for 3.5 weeks during the month of September, when I was in grade 12, I got a written letter of absence and spent almost a month working in various cities in China. So we flew into Shanghai and also went to Dalian as well as Chengdu. And this was a really good example of modeling definitely not just being an easy, luxurious job. So on our first day, we arrived at 2 in the morning at our hotel, and we had to be up at 6 a.m. to be on site at the convention center at 7 in the morning. And we stayed there until 2:30 a.m. working continuously. So for anyone who thinks modeling is just sitting pretty for a few hours with fancy makeup, that is not the case. You also have to adhere to the sizes. And I think it's common knowledge that models have to fit into specific clothing sizes. Some of those concepts are not always the healthiest, but nonetheless. But shoes fall into that role too. And in China, the average shoe size given to models is a size 7. And I have a size 10 foot because I'm very tall, and a lot of models do have larger feet due to their height. And you just kind of have to go with it because there is no alternative option. So you have to be pretty flexible and adaptive for the industry, and it's definitely long hours and hard work, but it also gives you amazing opportunities to meet different people, travel, and experience different cultures. So while I was there, we had a few days off throughout the 3.5 weeks, and I got to go to a panda bear reservation or conservation, which was amazing. And I got to meet other models from a variety of countries and explore different Chinese cultural things, try all the different foods, some of which I liked more than others. And it was a really cool experience. It was probably the most culturally different than anything I had been used to before that. And that was really eye-opening to see how a different country and different society functions, and just the different mannerisms of street culture and of how different cities and different areas of the country developed. So when I was up in Dalian on the north coast, for example, you can see a lot of Russian influence in the architecture and even in things like the food or even the height of the people. And if you go further south, that becomes less prevalent. And that's not something I ever would have thought about without being there. But it's definitely one of those things that you get to learn as you go. And one of the things why I think traveling is such an amazing opportunity to take if you have it. So after I returned from China, I finished high school, and then I went on my first international modeling contract. So the difference between a job like China and a contract is that when I went to China, I had specific work that I had already booked. I was for sure going to walk in Fashion Week for a specific amount of designers. When I went to Milan, Italy, I was there for 3 months living in an apartment and going to castings, which is like a job interview for a model, every single day. And you are not guaranteed work. So the way that that works is if you already have a pre-booked job, typically your airfare, accommodations, and food are all prepaid. If you go on a contract, those things will still be prepaid. However, you have to pay it off with your income. So if your rent for 3 months is $3,000, $1,000 a month, essentially the first $3,000 you earn will go towards the agency that brings you over. And you essentially have a short-term contract with a modeling agency there. If you don't book work within the first month, you will typically be sent home so that they don't have to continue paying for an apartment that you won't be able to pay back. So it's a different kind of system. You won't ever have to pay them back if you don't earn money, but at the same time, if you do earn money, the first portion of that goes towards the necessities the agency is paying for. So every day at 9 a.m., I would go to the agency and receive a list of castings, and this was definitely pushed me to be more independent because we would get this long list and they would be spread throughout the entire city, and we had to figure out how we were getting where and what made the most sense with time planning. And I remember once there were castings back to back on opposite sides of the city, and there's a lot of stressful little circumstances you have to figure out on your own. And while you do have an agent to help you with some things, for the most part, you're on your own. And I was 19 when I went to Milan, but I had roommates that were as young as 14 and 15. So it can definitely be a push for independence and maturity, because you are essentially living alone. You're going grocery shopping, you're doing your laundry, and you're going to a bunch of castings, which in other words is job interviews. But I did do a few runway shows there as well as photo shoots, and it was one of the best experiences that I had had up until that point. And this picture here is what a typical casting looks like. There's a lot of sitting and waiting around in long lines, so that's something to prepare for. It is not always just glamorous. So I went back to Vancouver after that contract, and I focused on runway specifically. As I mentioned, I'm very tall, and Fashion Week and runway is how I gained a lot of traction and work throughout my entire career. Everyone has something slightly different they can focus on. If I were more petite and more athletic of a build, I might have ended up focusing on sports and athleisure wear campaigns, but yeah, there's a lot of diversity, and you do kind of get niched into what you fit best. And for me, that was runway, which I've really enjoyed. But it brought me a lot of opportunities, because at Vancouver Fashion Week, despite it being a local event, there are designers who come from other countries and cities. So one of those designers is Noe Bernicelli. I walked for him multiple seasons in a row, and after 4 times working with him, he invited me to go to Lima, Peru to shoot a campaign and walk in Fashion Week there. So for anyone unfamiliar, Lima is in South America, which is just down the coast of Mexico, essentially, and then Panama, Colombia, etc. But it is on the Pacific coast, and it is a beautiful city with mountains in the back, water on the other side, and it has a lot of different historical influences. So you have the indigenous culture of Peruvians, but you also have a lot of Spanish colonial influence. And it was a very beautiful experience and a cool place to visit. And similarly to when I was in China, just the way the country and culture had developed, it sometimes felt like a step back in time. You would see people on the side of the streets just sitting at little little boxes playing board games, and kids on the street on scooters and playing with dolls, and there would be little puppet shows and street musicians everywhere. And there's just a lot of liveliness and society and culture just happening outside everywhere. This is a performance of a flamenco dancer, and I remember seeing kids at like 11 p.m. playing soccer in front of like a church square. So there's a lot going on, and it's a really cool environment to experience. And whether that's something you would want long-term or not is obviously a personal decision, but I do think it is really insightful just to be able to have those different experiences and see outside of your own social environment and cultural environment. So while I was there, I did the photo shoot campaign for Noe Bernicelli. So these are a few of the results of that. And then I also did Fashion Week, and I walked for Noe. This is one of his looks, but I also got to do a casting call for a variety of other designers, and I booked a few other jobs, and these are the results of 2 of those. One of them actually ended up in a spread in Vogue Mexico, which was really cool. I didn't find out until many months later, but since I don't live in Mexico, but it was a really cool thing to find out. And essentially, when you go to a casting as a model, you have to do a runway walk, at least for Fashion Week. And then based on your walk and your portfolio, which is your book with all of your pictures, you get selected. And if you do, you go to a fitting. And they take a picture of you, and then they order the outfits. So you have a number, and that's how you know when it's your turn to go on stage. And yeah, it's a interesting system, but it was always a lot of fun. So after that, I went back home to Vancouver, and eventually I went to Paris for modeling related interviews. And this was more of a decision of my own. I went there to try and find an agency in Paris. So Vancouver doesn't have the best fashion market and the most connections. And as a result, I wanted to go myself and try all my options. And that is what I did. I did also have a few jobs while I was there, so it wasn't a vacation. And my focus was work related. And I did have an earning potential, but I was also going there for meetings. And Paris is a beautiful city. It was my first time there, and I absolutely loved it. One of the things that I really love about traveling in Europe is that it really supports cultural education. So while I was there, there are a lot of museums and events that happen for free or are free for people under the age of 25 or for students, etc. And that's a very common thing in a lot of European countries and something that I think makes doing things more accessible than people maybe know about. So a lot of the times when I travel in Europe, while of course the flight and accommodations cost money, the actual things that you do throughout the day are often free or very affordable, at least if you're young and fall into those youth or student categories, which is always a nice benefit. And then after that, I went back to Italy. And this time I flew into Bergamo, which is a town at the base of the Alps. And I stayed there just for one night and explored. You can see some of my art history interests coming through here, but I absolutely love viewing historic architecture, specifically Italian architecture, anything Renaissance, Romanesque, Baroque, etc., is very much my interests. And yeah, it was really cool to have the opportunity to explore. And since I was going for my own meetings and smaller jobs as opposed to going on contract, I had a lot more flexibility to do little trips such as these outside of my work. So I did do some jobs and had some meetings in Milan, which is one of my favorite cities I've been to. And here's another kind of example of something that's quite normal, at least in Milan. I don't know about all of Italy, but they have this beautiful park, and in the park they have just like a little carousel and a few other things as well. And they have that in Munich, Germany too, and a few other places I've been. And that's like another aspect that I really liked about different European countries and cultural, societal differences. Because on one hand, you don't have the same freedom or expansive nature that you do have in the US or Canada. It's not as large, it's much more densely populated. So you can't go on, 10-hour hikes where there's no one around. But well, maybe if you go up the Alps, but otherwise. But they put a lot of effort into things like city parks and things around the cities for natural experiences. And I feel like the parks in Europe and the things that they offer there, whether it is just the layout of the park itself or whether it is amenities such as carousels or outdoor theater productions or something like that, there's always a lot going on, which is a really cool experience. This is a picture of an outdoor event, which was right in front of the Duomo, and it was from the Scala Symphony, which is one of the most prominent symphony and operas in Italy, and they were performing for free. And that was just a really cool thing to be a part of, because normally you would have to buy a ticket for a good price. So yeah, there's a lot of cool opportunities like that. I also went to Genoa, which is one of my other favorite cities. And I think traveling to these different places, despite them not being far apart, really shows you the diversity within a country. The same can be said for the US, going from New Orleans to New York is vastly different. I haven't been to either, but from what I know. But I think a lot of the times people think of, especially in Europe, of a country rather than a city. So they say they'll go to Italy, France, Germany, England, etc. And kind of base that off of one or two locations, but there is so much diversity within all of these countries. And there's also a really good transit system between the different cities. There's train systems that are affordable and fast, often faster than driving because they don't have to deal with traffic. And there's also very affordable flights for longer distances. So that's definitely something to look into. Following that, I went to London, England. And again, all of this was for meetings in the fashion industry, as well as smaller jobs that I had booked while at home in Canada. So people I connected with. And this was a very cool experience as well. Also my first time in London. And I never would have been able to travel this much if it had purely been from a vacation standpoint, just out of financial means. So I'm incredibly grateful and privileged to have had the opportunity to do it this way. And one of the things that I would recommend if you ever find yourself in London and you're a fan of theater or musicals is to check tickets for productions. I went to see Wicked there. This was many years ago before the Wicked movie came out, but it's one of my favorite musicals. And I recently rechecked what tickets were there versus New York, and you can get tickets for as cheap as £20 in London, and in New York, it's $130 upwards. So theater is much more accessible there, or whether you're into normal theater, musicals, ballet productions, etc. The cost in general in a lot of places in Europe tends to be somewhat lower. And if that's something you're interested in, definitely see what's going on while you're traveling and try and incorporate it, because it's a really cool experience and you might end up saving money as opposed to going wherever you're from. So while I was in London, I was put on hold for a modeling job, but my accommodations were I was on my last day and I wasn't able to renew them. So I couldn't stay where I was for longer, and I decided to fly to Berlin, Germany. That's where my half brother lives, and waited out there to see if I got the job. It's only about a 30-40 minute flight and pretty affordable. So it seemed like a much better option than going all the way back to Canada or paying for a hotel in London. So I went to Germany. I waited a few days, explored, hung out with my brother, and then I heard back that I did not get the job. And starting there, my life took a little bit of a different and very impulsive route. So I had always wanted to try living in Germany, but I had honestly never had the courage to put everything together. It always seemed very intimidating to move everything and find a job, etc., since it is quite far from Vancouver. And at this point, I thought to myself, I am here anyway. I'm just going to stay and see if it works out. This had not been pre-planned. All I had with me was carry-on luggage with summer clothing. So I ended up finding a room to stay in that a university student was renting out for the summer while she was going home. And I thought it was the perfect opportunity to spend a couple months there and see if I find a job and if I like it. And if yes, stay long-term, and if not, go back home. I did still do some modeling, but while I was there, I ended up starting in hospitality at a luxury hotel called the Hotel Adlon Kempinski. It's a very historic hotel and a very luxurious hotel. It is where the former Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, used to stay when she visited Germany, as well as many other celebrities and prominent people. I did not know this when I applied. But one thing that I will say that traveling and working in multiple different environments has taught me is if you think a job is slightly out of reach, but it is within your interest, go for it. Apply. It cannot hurt you. And a lot of the times you might unexpectedly get an interview or even get a job that you thought you were slightly underqualified for. So I would always recommend to not shy away from a job just because you think it's maybe not quite where you're at yet. Obviously, if you need hard skills like computer coding and you have no idea how to do that, don't do that. But if it's just based on experience or soft skills or something that is easy and fast to learn, I would definitely recommend that you go for it and just take those risks. One of the things that life has taught me is you can always go back. You can choose to apply at a job, you can move to a different country, you can apply to a university, and if it doesn't work out, you can typically go back or make a different choice. Obviously, there are certain caveats, and I realize that some of that is linked to privilege, but on the most part, you're not signing your life away just because you decide to try something new. And I think that's something important to keep in mind, and to just say yes to experiences you're interested in and try new things. I think a lot of people get stuck in the thought process of, is this the right decision? Is this financially intelligent? Will this pan out 5, 10, 20 years from now? And even if you pick the thing that you think gives you that stability, things can always change. So I would highly recommend to go for it if you have any kind of interests and you're wondering where that might lead you. So while I was in Germany and worked at the hotel, I befriended someone who was from southern Germany, and they lived in Germany, but their dad worked in Basel, Switzerland. And this is really common because there's open borders and you can technically go to work or to school across the border. As long as there's no language barrier or you speak the language, but otherwise that's a pretty feasible option. So I got to visit, and it was a really beautiful experience. I love the city. You can see I was there in the fall, so the colors were stunning. But it's just one of those things that I would also recommend if you have the opportunity. So I went back to Berlin, Germany for another month, and then I was still living there and employed and had my own apartment. I was only in Switzerland for a few days, but I then took a few days to go to Athens and Aegina in Greece. And when you're already in Europe, this is a pretty affordable option. I think that was hard for me to grasp coming from Canada, because flights within Canada to get from one side to the other can cost you $700. But in flying from Berlin to Athens was around 30 euro. And the Airbnb I stayed in with my friend at the time was 27 euro a night. And we split it between the two of us. So it was an incredibly affordable way to travel. And I think that that's hard to process if you don't grow up there or you're not familiar with that, but definitely something to look into if you do find yourself anywhere in Europe. But it was an amazing experience to go to Greece. It is a country I have been fascinated with for the longest time. I love the architecture, the history, the art. I went to lots of museums and ruins, and yeah, it was a beautiful place to explore. Also, if you love cats, I do. There are so many stray cats in Greece, but people feed them and take care of them. This was an older local gentleman, and he goes out every day to this one area and feeds these 11 specific cats and puts out water for them. And he gave me some treats to give them. And yeah, I also always recommend talking to the people you meet, obviously within reason, and making connections, because you never know where you might meet a friend or someone that could become someone you visit in the future or that visits you. Not necessarily pointing to the elderly man, but just in general. But yeah, it was close to Christmas. It was December, so it was very festive, which was also fun to experience. And then I went back to Berlin for Christmas and just to continue working. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to Germany for Christmas or around Christmas time, anytime in December, I would highly recommend it. There is nothing compared to a German Christmas market and a German Christmas environment. I think other countries in Europe do similar things. I'm not as familiar, but I would imagine Austria, Switzerland, Czech, Denmark, etc., are probably all similar in that environment. But it is a very traditional and historical thing in Germany, and the Christmas markets are beautiful, and the city is decorated and it comes alive. These pictures are taken in January. This is in the cold, barren winter, but these are in December, and the city is literally glowing. It's so beautiful. So I would definitely recommend that if you are a fan of festivities and Christmas time. So I worked and lived in Berlin for a total of just a little over 1 year. And then I eventually returned to Vancouver, Canada, just out of personal choice. And I started working at the Fairmont Hotel Vancouver. So I kept my hospitality job and began work there. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Fairmont, but it is a brand like the Hyatt, the Hilton, etc. So it is a relatively luxurious hotel, nothing insane, but it is nice. And they have hotels internationally, worldwide. And working in hospitality is an amazing opportunity to build international experiences and connections if you work for a brand that has multiple locations. There are, of course, boutique hotels also, but working at the Fairmont, you were able to travel at an extremely discounted rate and stay in other luxury hotels for as little as $70 a night. So if you're traveling with a friend or with your family, that's a pretty good deal. Not to mention it's really nice hotels you stay in. And food and everything that you need to buy in the hotel is also 50% off. And they're part of the Accor group, which is an umbrella company that owns them. And so there are other hotels besides Fairmont as well. So if the city you go to does not have a Fairmont, then there are other options. I'm not saying you should work for Fairmont, but this is very typical within hospitality. So if it is something that interests you, I would definitely look into it. And hospitality does not require a degree either. And it is quite well paying, at least in my personal experiences. So I've worked at a front desk, for example, at a hotel, and I was earning $28 an hour and had the opportunity to get discounts when traveling. And that's a pretty good combination because that wage allows you to actually take advantage of those discounts. But so with that, I was able to go to Banff and Lake Louise. This is inside the Banff Springs Hotel, which is a Fairmont, and I stayed there with my family. And it is beautiful, very cold, but very beautiful. And that was just one of the opportunities that I got to take advantage of thanks to my work in hospitality. So following that, I went back to Europe on vacation this time around. But this is also linked to my experience in hospitality. So I went to Brighton, England, Berlin, and Munich. And then I continued to Vienna. And in all of these places, I stayed at Fairmont or Accor hotels for a really affordable price. And it made it incredibly accessible. And as I mentioned before, traveling within Europe, once you get there, is also quite affordable. And also, a lot of these hotel companies have connections to things like car rental firms and other things like that. So you can get discounted rates for additional things. So there's a lot of potential benefits. Hospitality might not be for everyone, but if you think it might be for you and you also like to travel, there's a lot of potential perks there. So yeah, Vienna turned out to be one of my favorite cities. And then I went to Budapest, Hungary. It is somewhere I've been 3 times now. Because one of my best friends lives there, and it was a girl that I met when I was living in Milan the first time. Her name's Vivian. She's in one of the earlier photos, but that's something that I meant when I said earlier, make sure that you open yourself to social scenarios, and just because you're only somewhere short term doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to invest in friendships or connections, whether that be professional or otherwise, because you never know what that could turn into, and whether that is a for fun opportunity to visit a friend and not have to pay for a hotel, or and have a personal tour guide, or whether it turns into a business opportunity or an academic opportunity. If you're going to put in the effort and the risk to go travel anyway, make sure you take advantage of all aspects of that. Talk to the people, try the food, experience the culture, try the language to whatever degree is reasonable, depending on how long you're there. But those are all things I would encourage, because the more you can immerse yourself, the more you'll gain from it, both in terms of personal enjoyment, in terms of education, but also in terms of potential long-term bonds and friendships. So I continue to Croatia from there. As you can see, Hungary's right here, so it's a short-ish drive. And Croatia is one of my favorite countries, unexpectedly, but you can see you have the historic towns such as Zagreb, which is the capital. And then not too far away, there is the Plitvik, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Lakes National Park. And as a geography student, which is what I am now, this was a really cool area to explore, because you essentially hike or walk down into a valley, and the top area where the street level is almost desert-like. It is very dry. And the lower you go and you get to the base of that river and the waterfalls, the more lush and jungle-like it becomes. And it's one of the fastest shifting by elevation environments that I've seen like that. And I thought that was really cool to explore. So I think it's always fun to do things that maybe you wouldn't normally do, or just truly analyze the things around you, because there's often a lot going on that might be interesting. You never know where it'll lead you. At this point, I did not know I was going to go to school for geography, but I truly think some of my traveling inspired that decision. But yeah, I also went to Split in Croatia, and Bol, which is a island close to the coast. And then I returned to Vancouver. And one of the last things I wanted to mention or talk about is nannying and au pair work. So I nannied during the pandemic predominantly, so traveling was not something that I associated with it. However, my sister also nannied, and I also have a friend who worked as an au pair. And if you like kids, which obviously is something you need to like if you want to do that profession, I personally do. It's a really cool opportunity to be able to live and work internationally and experience different cultures at a very affordable, or even at a earning rate where you end up walking away with money instead of spending money, depending on what kind of arrangement you can come to. And there's different sites and things that you can do that through officially, or of course, sometimes it's personal connections. But either way, that is a pretty accessible and very popular thing, especially within Europe. A lot of my friends that I know who did so within Europe, but I know it's also possible in North America and other places. So definitely something to look into if you're keen to travel. And I know there are certain arrangements that are as short as 6 to 8 weeks. So it might even be a good summer opportunity where you get to see a different area of the world, without committing to moving long term, but without having to spend the money like you would on a vacation. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. I hope it was interesting and enjoyable. But if anyone has any questions or comments or anything like that, I would be more than happy to answer about traveling, work, modeling, or anything else. But yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sabrina. That was absolutely fantastic. Absolutely riveting. I think everybody must envy your life. Let's open the floor to questions. Everybody, jump right in. Ask whatever you would like to know.
Feel free to ask about cultural things too. I was on a time limit, so I didn't delve into that too much, but I'm happy to talk about cultural differences if that's something someone is worried about. I know a lot of people have apprehensions when it comes to traveling to places with different languages. I'm happy to speak on that, or other short-term opportunities, etc. So yeah, whatever area, anything as broad as you like, feel free to ask and I'll try to answer. That's an interesting question. I would say, hmm, I would say most of Western Europe is fairly easy to navigate. Germany, France, Italy, Switzerland, England, those are all countries that have really good transit systems by train. They don't have borders between the countries. So if you want to travel internationally, I think that makes it easier. You don't have to deal with border controls. Once you get there, you're good to go. And most Western European countries, if you're concerned about language barriers, also have a large population of people who at least know a little bit of English. So you'll be able to get around without knowing the language. So that's definitely something I noticed traveling in different areas. When I was in Hungary and Croatia, for example, English is not as dominant. That has to do with its Soviet history largely. Ironically, Germany was, or German was a more common language in Hungary than English to be able to get around. In Peru, similarly, English isn't as widely spoken, but Western Europe, any of those countries, that's really easy. And yeah, I would say that definitely makes it very accessible and easy to navigate. And you don't really ever need a car, which is nice. If you do have a car and you like driving, though, I think the mainland US as well as Canada have some amazing opportunities to explore by car via road trip, especially if you like exploring nature because there's so many national parks and things to see like that. Also, if you're coming from the US, the exchange rate's really good if you go to Canada. Just a little side note, something to consider. Sometimes you might think, oh, this hotel is expensive, it's $200, but then you realize the currency difference makes it really affordable for you coming from the US. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. Reverse also, Europe, I think the euro is slightly more than the US dollar. So just something to keep in mind. I've heard Japan is relatively easy to navigate transit-wise with its train systems. I would not say that China is from my experiences. Um, so yeah, I would say Western Europe and then North America is probably the easiest. I would preference Western Europe if you're wanting to do train and public transportation or short flights, and all of that is very affordable. Alternatively, if you wanted to do road trips and like driving, then Canada, US is a good place to go.
And Kayana, I'll just jump in for a minute to add to what Sabrina said. You can also purchase a Eurail pass or a BritRail pass if you are under a certain age, and they will allow you to go all over the continent or all over Britain for a certain length of time on their trains. So you can just hop on and off and not have to always worry about buying individual tickets. And if you're going to be there for a while, it's usually worth it because it usually works out to be cheaper. If you're just there for a short time, then you kind of have to do the math and say, am I really going to save any money if I buy the pass? But that's maybe something to consider if you don't like driving.
Also, another option, especially if you are short term and the train prices aren't that affordable, is there is, at least in Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, and Hungary. I use this. I don't know about all countries in Europe, but there's a system called Flixbus. It's Flix bus, and it's kind of like a Greyhound bus of sorts. It's like a larger travel bus. There's a bathroom on board, but it is so affordable. I took that bus from Munich to Vienna when I was there, and I believe it cost me 12 euro. So it is incredibly cheap. Obviously, the price depends on what time and what day of the week it is. So there is a bit of range. If you have flexibility, I definitely recommend looking into that. But yeah, there's a lot of options. And if you do drive in Europe, another thing you can think about, if that's something you're comfortable doing, is you can typically pick up a car in one place and return it in another if necessary. It might have a slightly additional fee, but if you're thinking like you don't want to do a round trip or something like that, that's also something you can look into. A lot of the times when I've gone to Europe just for vacation, I fly into one place and I fly out of another place to kind of not have that back and forth. And a lot of the times, a one-way ticket is the same as a round trip if you have them separately. I definitely recommend checking Google Flights. It gives you a good view of the different prices and airlines and everything. That's my go-to when I travel, and you can set alerts. So yeah. I hope that answers everything. If there was
Great
any.
suggestions. Yeah. Well, I have a question. I know you were telling me the other day that you started your own photography company. She's amazingly talented. And I was looking at the quality of the photos that you posted. Do you want to mention something about that? Because that might be a way forward for people who want to travel and have, sort of pay through their work, right? If they're
So I started doing photography while I was still modeling, and it's something I still do. So I don't really model much anymore. School kind of prioritizes that, but and it's hard to travel when you're in school full time. But I do still have my photography company, and I'm not like an official business. I don't have employees, but I do have my freelance company. I have a website, I have social media, and I developed it for fashion photography as well as headshots for actors. Especially living in Vancouver. Vancouver has a very prominent acting industry, but that is a really easy thing to take with you and do. I did take all of the pictures except the ones that I'm in that were on the slides as well. You can see my photography ability increasing as the years go by. The high school exchange pictures are not so good, sadly, but yeah, that's definitely something to think about. And even if it doesn't become like a hugely lucrative experience, I think that it can still be a cool way to make connections, meet other people, have fun experiences in terms of maybe going to places that you wouldn't have necessarily gone for a photo shoot or something like that. And a camera is a really easy thing to bring with you wherever you go. So, but there's a lot of things like that. I know some people might be into vlogging, social media, YouTube, whatever. That's obviously an option. I don't think that, I mean, unless you're well established, but otherwise, I don't think that those would necessarily fund your whole trip by any means, but you can combine them with things. For example, it's quite common to be able to work in a hostel and therefore gain free room and board. So you'll have free accommodations and food in return for working a certain amount of hours a week. And because it's not official work, you're not getting paid for it. It kind of mitigates that issue of needing visas, at least short term. Obviously, you can't stay there forever, but so that's an option. And also, I meant to mention there's also, at least through UH Manoa, I'm not too familiar with Leeward, there's an exchange program as well, both national as well as international exchange programs. And that's definitely something to look into, because if you go through the national exchange program, which actually also includes Canada, Guam, and American Samoa. So it's not purely the US. You can still technically go international. You just pay whatever you pay at UH, and that gets transferred to where you are. So there's no additional costs. You pay the same thing. So you're not losing any money. And say you had a job at something like Target, Safeway, etc., and you went to the mainland US, you might even be able to transfer your job. But also, over the years, I've learned that jobs like that you can pretty much always get. So I would say don't be too afraid of losing a job that is, I'm not saying your future career once you graduate, you probably have a different kind of profession, but in the meantime, gaining a variety of work experiences and getting a new place of work is honestly, I would say a benefit, if anything, but also not as difficult or impossible as people tend to think. There's always going to be something hiring. So I wouldn't say, um, don't travel because you're worried that you're going to not be able to find a job when you come back, if your job is something like working at Starbucks or Safeway or Target, etc. But I know that's a personal decision for everyone. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Wonderful. You gained a lot of insights through all your travels and all these experiences. There's one thing that I wanted to mention to our viewers just about au pair work and being a nanny and how you did it in Canada and the language was in English. But there are, as you mentioned, opportunities to do that in Europe as well. Many European families, I know, for example, in Italy, they really want to hire an au pair who will teach their children English because they really want them to learn it. And in France as well. So if you are a native speaker of English, then that might be another thing that you could look into. And if you like children, that's a good combination. And then there's always the possibility of teaching English at a language school if you want to go that route as well. So yeah.
Also, au pair and nannying work for a variety of different ages of kids. I like working with like toddlers and preschoolers, but if you are not that into that, but you're fine with like 5 to 10-year-olds or 10 to 12-year-olds, there's a lot of range. So my personal experience is with younger kids, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing out there. That's just coincidence and preference. And also, if you speak any other language, perchance, that's something that can be to your benefit with au pair work as well as with hospitality. And a lot of professions, honestly, I would say always put that out there. It can only be helpful. So.
Well, Sabrina, I want to thank you so much for this. It's been absolutely wonderful. We're so grateful to you that you took the time to do this, and it was very inspiring. And I'm sure that everyone will benefit greatly from your presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you likewise for inviting me and having me speak. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope it was helpful or fun or whatever else you gained some kind of insight. So yeah, and if anyone has any questions in the future, if you reconsider anything and want information about any experiences or just have general questions, feel free to let Professor Scotty know and she can put you in touch with me. I have absolutely no problem with that. So if you're ever, whether it be about photography, freelance work, or living in Europe or anything, being an international student, if you're considering doing an exchange or something like that, I'm happy to answer any kinds of questions.
Oh, wonderful. We're very appreciative. And all of our guests have thanked you very much in the chat. Okay. So terrific. Thank you. And we will see everybody again soon. And keep global studies in mind, folks. Bye for now.